based off of what we're hearing in the media, it appears that Tim Stützle's likelihood of being a Los Angeles King is rising by the day. What is up, viewer out there watching this video? Alex back here, and today we're talking about the 2020 NHL Entry Draft. It's been a while since we've talked about this whole topic of the guys who are going to go somewhere near the top, but Tim Stützle is a guy that many fan bases that are fans of this YouTube channel absolutely adore, and it's not a surprise. Tim Stützle is a top prospect for the 2020 NHL Draft, a guy who, as far back as over a year ago, German hockey outlets were labeling was going to be the next Draisaitl. Not in terms of how he plays, but in terms of his dominance and his overall value as an NHL player. Stutzle is projected to go second overall. Some have him at third, some have him at second, others have him a little bit lower than that. But when it comes to 2020 NHL draft risers, Tim Stützle is the guy who has risen the most. I remember in the mock draft video we made a year ago, literally a year ago, back in the summer of 2019, I had Stützle somewhere in my top 10, and people were calling me nuts. This guy's supposed to go later than that. Why are you saying he is this good? Well, it's a year later, and all of a sudden TSN and Bob McKenzie have him at second overall in front of Quinton Byfield. So not to say I told you so, but I kind of told you so. This guy's pretty good, and all the fan bases that are in the top, let's just say top 5 of the 2020 NHL Draft are drooling over the idea of this kind of player. However, last time we talked about Tim Stützle, we noted how it was apparent that speculation arose that he would most likely go to the Los Angeles Kings second overall once the 2020 NHL Draft came and went. Well, we have ourselves some doubling down from AJ Jakubec on TSN 1200. Earlier yesterday on TSN 1200, he said this: "I feel quite strongly. And the more discussions I have, the more it seems Stutzle will not go beyond second overall." So for the most part, even though this video is talking about how Stutzle is probably going to one team, I'm making this video to talk to 3 teams' fan bases. It's the Kings, it's the Sens, and it's the Red Wings. First off, LA fans. I've seen so many Kings fans in my comment section so divided on the whole Byfield Stutzle thing that I know this kind of news is really going to make some Kings fans super happy, but it's really going to displease a lot of other Kings fans. After the 2020 NHL Draft Lottery, I made a video talking about how Byfield was going to LA, because for the longest time he was going to be that second overall guy. He was projected second ever since like the end of 2018, so that's a long time ago. And in the comments of that Byfield video, many people were saying, "Oh, awesome, we have Kopitar on our team, he's getting old, we can replace him with Byfield down the line. It's a perfect transition of the torch right here, and I would rather have it that way than taking any other player." However, once we made our first Stutzle to LA video, I got a whole bunch of other comments of people saying, "Yes, I want this guy, a really good German winger who is going to dominate the game, a guy who's already played against men, and a guy who could probably play in the NHL as soon as next season." Now, of course, the Byfield guys were definitely in that comment section too, saying how they would rather have Byfield. But the same was true in the other video, because some people in the Byfield video did say that Stutzle was the more desirable player. So ultimately, it's Rob Blake's decision to make. Whether you go with Byfield or a Stutzle, either are worthy of second overall. And if both of these guys pan out the way we know they can, then you really won't be a loser if you take at least one of them. But for the other fan bases, okay, this is where things get a little bit interesting. Now, TSN 1200 is the Ottawa version of TSN Radio. So you may be thinking to yourself, why were they talking about this in Ottawa when it's LA kind of related news? Well, it's because they're talking mostly about this idea to set up what the Ottawa Senators are going to do for the 2020 draft, because the Sens have 3 and 5, meaning that they're going to have a shot at 2 of Byfield, Stutzle, Rossi, Raymond, Holtz, Lundell, etc. Depending on who you ask, that could be extremely valuable. But everybody kind of knows that Ottawa's job at number 3 is probably the easiest job at the entire draft. Just take the guy that the LA Kings didn't end up taking, whether that's Byfield or Stutzle. Now, because Quinton Byfield was ranked second the entire year, pretty much until the very end, people were kind of saying, okay, you know what, if we get Tim Stützle in Ottawa, that'd be great. But now, because of all this Stutzle to LA news that started to leak itself in throughout the media, Ottawa Senators fans that I've been seeing have been kind of preparing themselves to both options, pretty much. I've seen a lot of Ottawa Senators fans saying, you know what, whether it's Byfield or Stutzle, I don't really care. They're both really good players, and ultimately, that is the perspective that I think you should probably go with. But I've been seeing more and more Ottawa fans kind of open up to the idea of Quinton Byfield falling into their laps. Which, if you've been following these prospects for over a year, you know how good that is for your organization. Especially with the fact that your own first-round pick is down there at number 5, where you can get a really solid winger or a D-man to also play alongside of Byfield, either on a power play scenario or on 5-on-5. Things are looking really, really nice for Ottawa. But the debate reigns true as to what LA is going to do, because ultimately, whatever LA does, that decides the fate of the Ottawa Senators on whether or not they go for a center, or ultimately a winger who can play center, third overall. And finally, the last fan base I wanted to talk to was the Red Wings fan base, because I know I'm the guy who said that Stutzle could go to Detroit, and that I would want him to go to Detroit. However, I do acknowledge that it's a very unlikely possibility, and now, with more rhetoric coming out that Stutzle probably isn't even going to exit the top 2, it's kind of opening Red Wings fans up to the idea of taking somebody else. And I think, just looking at the Red Wings subreddit and Twitter and all that, looking at what other Red Wings fans have had to say, I think more and more Red Wings fans are starting to accept the 4th overall draft position instead of just loathing about not being able to get 1st overall anymore. Sure, does it suck still? Yes, it absolutely does. But at the very end of the day, the Red Wings had a higher chance at drafting 4th than they did at drafting anywhere in the top 3. So with that all established, and with the draft lottery already said and done, and the Red Wings already solidifying themselves at the 4th overall spot, I've been seeing more and more Red Wings fans actually open up to the idea of Cole Perfetti, because he's the guy who plays in Saginaw, which is literally just down the road from Detroit, and he's the guy who many people said is probably going to get a lot of consideration from that Red Wings team, and a guy who could very well go 4th overall because some people do have him that high. There is indeed a lot of debate as to whether or not the Red Wings would take this kind of player, but I've been seeing a lot of Red Wings fans opening up to the idea of him, which is nice to see because he's a great talent. In my opinion, he's no Tim Stützle, because Stützle is kind of in a little bit of a higher tier than that, and we did see that earlier this week actually, because Tim Stützle is indeed playing hockey games. He played in the U20 German scrimmage against the U20 Switzerland team that was live streamed earlier on July 20th at 7 or 8 a.m. in the morning Pacific Standard Time. We were all in the chat over there watching. Tim Stützle had a beautiful assist where he just wheeled around the entire offensive zone and set one up for JJ Peterka in front. But even though Tim Stützle is a very high caliber player, there are still so many others in this draft to look at. And for the Red Wings and for the Senators, it looks like these two fan bases are starting to open up to the idea of other players who could be in that realm. Because hey, if the LA Kings end up taking a Quinton Byfield instead of Stützle, it'd be a really big shock to everybody else who's looking at other teams, but ultimately it would be a very welcome surprise for sure. So that's our video here today on AJ Jakubec doubling down. It's the KFC double down sandwich. You know that thing with the bread that's actually made of 2 chicken? Yeah, it's really oily, really not good for you, but at the same time, it's the double down that we saw here today on Tim Stützle reportedly being the LA Kings guy. Talk to me in the comments what you think about that, because I know there are many Kings fans who are super high on Byfield, but there also are a lot who are high on Stützle as well. If you're a fan of the Senators, are you looking at anybody else at number 3, or are you only taking a look at whoever the LA Kings don't end up picking? And as for the Red Wings, disregarding any miracle scenario where one of these guys, Stützle or Byfield, drops to 4, who are you thinking about taking? Because I know the big name so far has been Cole Perfetti, but there are indeed some other very good names who could be considered there too. We've talked about a few of these in other videos, but I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. So that Troll 99, and bye.